Welcome back, everyone. All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating piece of historical irony, how the strict, totally uncompromising control of early American Puritans accidentally forged the very foundation of our modern religious freedoms. We so often think of early America as this monolithic block of quiet, pious settlers, but as we're about to see through the source material, it was actually a volatile powder keg. We're talking theological rebels, rigid authorities, and some seriously dramatic social upheaval.
So how exactly did a group of intensely strict Puritans inadvertently create American religious freedom? It's a fantastic question, isn't it? I mean, the Puritans definitely didn't come to America to set up freedom of religion for everyone else. They came to establish their own strict society. And yet, their iron grip on power produced such fierce blowback that it literally birthed the independent, liberty-loving culture we recognize today.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, shaping Congregationalism. Second, the rise of Baptists. Third, reactions to the Puritans. And finally, the decline of Puritanism.
Starting off with Section 1, Shaping American Congregationalism, Building the City on a Hill.
To really grasp the conflicts of this era, we've got to set the scene in 17th century Massachusetts. This was the absolute epicenter of Puritan control, where they were hell-bent on building their idealized city on a hill. But to understand how they did that, we have to look at one massive concept, ecclesiology. Basically, that's the theological study of church polity, or, simply put, how you run a church. For the Puritans, the theological debate had shifted away from just individual salvation to how the whole community should be governed. They fiercely rejected the hierarchical top-down structure of the Anglican Church back in England. Instead, they wanted the local congregation to call the shots. So the crucial takeaway here is that this seemingly dry academic concept of church management was actually the match that lit the fire of early American rebellion. And it's super fascinating to watch this build up over time. Back in the 1620s, you had two main groups settling in Massachusetts: the Separatists down in Plymouth, who completely abandoned the Church of England, and the Puritans up in Boston, who originally just wanted to purify it from within. But separated by an entire ocean from the mother church, they realized they actually shared the exact same goal for local church governance. So, fast forward to 1648, they joined forces through this historic agreement called the Cambridge Platform. This essentially united the factions and officially birthed American Congregationalism. Just like that, they became a powerful, unified, and very strict religious establishment.
Moving right along to Section 2, the rise of Baptists, seeking independence from the state. The origins of this movement are honestly wild. Just listen to this anecdote from the source material. Back in 1608, two English independents, John Smith and Thomas Helways, basically decided that infant baptism, which everyone was doing, was entirely unbiblical. They believed only adults who voluntarily chose the faith should be baptized. To make this point, they fled to the Netherlands for religious toleration, and once in Amsterdam, John Smith was so deeply committed to this new conviction that he waded into a canal and literally baptized himself. No joke. It's such a passionate, bold demonstration of their absolute commitment to adult believers' baptism.
Now, what's really interesting is how this brand new independent movement almost immediately fractured. Over on the left, we've got the General, or Arminian Baptists, founded by Smith and Helwys. They firmly believed in free will, that humans could choose to say yes or no to God. And over the next century, many in this camp shifted further left, eventually questioning the Trinity and merging into what became Unitarianism. Now, on the right, reacting to all of that, you had the Calvinist, or Particular Baptists, who emerged around 1638. They believed in strict predestination. In fact, some of them went so far right that they became hyper-Calvinists, arguing against missionary work entirely, just because they believed God's choices were already permanently locked in. But despite those pretty intense theological splits, Baptists actually shared some core unifying principles when they formed their associations. They viewed the church strictly as a gathering of voluntary believers, not something you're just born into by default. They demanded adult believers' baptism. They fiercely maintained that all authority, including the right to ordain ministers, belonged exclusively to the local church. And, crucially, they demanded a strict separation of church and state.
And guys, this brings us to a massive historical irony. Today, when we talk about the separation of church and state, the conversation is almost always about protecting the state or the government from religious influence. But the early Baptists, they championed this idea for the exact opposite reason. They wanted strict separation literally to keep the government out of their religious affairs. They did not want civil authorities harassing them for baptizing adults or interfering in their local independent congregations.
Which brings us to Section 3, Reactions to the Puritans, the breaking point of control.
So, the Puritans in Boston had set up this society where civil and religious life were completely enmeshed, and they had absolutely zero tolerance for dissent. But as we see in the source material, there were three major historical disruptors who fiercely pushed back against this establishment. We've got Roger Williams, a man who became an extreme independent, the Quakers, a radical new sect, and Anne Hutchinson, a woman who broke every social norm of her day. Let's look at each of them.
First up is Roger Williams. This guy had quite the journey. He started as an Anglican, became a Puritan in Boston, then a Separatist, then a Baptist, before finally deciding he was a seeker who belonged to no denomination at all. Williams literally couldn't stand the bigotry and the tight, suffocating control of Boston. So what does he do? He flees south through the wilderness and founds Providence. But he didn't just base it on religious toleration. He founded it on the radical, uncompromising principle of absolute religious liberty. Providence was designed to be a true haven, where you were completely free to practice any religion or, frankly, no religion at all.
Oh, and here's just a quick, fun piece of trivia for you from our source. Because of Roger Williams' settlement, the technical, official name of the state is actually Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. It currently holds the record for the longest name of any of the 50 U.S. states, so the smallest state has the longest name, all thanks to our rebellious seeker.
Okay, the second major reaction came from the Quakers. Founded in England by George Fox, they just completely abandoned church hierarchy and liturgy. Instead, they preached about the inner light of Christ working personally within individuals. Now, while today we might picture Quaker meetings as very silent and reflective, their early meetings were wild. They were raucous, filled with shouting and dancing, which is exactly why they were mockingly called Quakers in the first place. Because they totally bypassed traditional church authority, Boston viewed them as a massive threat to civil order.
And when these Quakers tried to bring their message to Boston, the Puritan authorities met them with brutal hostility. At first, they literally just shipped the new arrivals back. But when the Quakers kept coming, the authorities escalated to executions. It's a really somber reality that the picturesque Boston Common we walk through today, it was once a hanging ground. The Puritans hanged Quakers right there on the Common to suppress their movement. One of those martyrs was Mary Jower, and today there's actually a statue of her outside the Massachusetts State House honoring her stand for religious liberty. Because of this horrific persecution, the Quakers fled south, finding a welcoming refuge with Roger Williams down in Providence.
Our third major reaction was Anne Hutchinson. She was a Puritan living right there in Boston, but she started inviting people into her home to discuss theology. Now, this was incredibly dangerous back then for a couple of reasons. First, the Puritan leadership absolutely hated her specific theological views. Second, and maybe more importantly, she was a woman. By acting as an unordained teacher of theology, she was actively breaking the strict social norms of the era. Ultimately, the Puritan establishment just couldn't handle her defiance. Like the others, she was forced out and sought refuge in, you guessed it, Providence, Rhode Island, where religious liberty allowed her to teach and speak freely.
And that leads us to our final act. Section 4, the decline of Puritanism. Wealth, compromise, and lost zeal. We've seen the outside rebels, right? But what happened to the seemingly invincible Puritan machine itself? Why did a society that was so perfectly structured, so dedicated to strict biblical rules and careful living, ultimately just collapse from the inside out? The first Puritans were incredibly successful, but they just couldn't sustain their vision past the first few generations. Well, the answer really lies in this fascinating, vicious cycle of decline. Think about it. The first generation of Puritans lived these incredibly frugal, strictly disciplined lives. Because of their intense work ethic and thrift, they built highly successful businesses. Now, originally, they poured that money back into the church or civil society. But by the second, third, and fourth generations, they started keeping that massive wealth for themselves. They built elaborate mansions, like those beautiful historic homes you can still see in places like Salem today. As they accumulated wealth and shifted their focus to commerce, they completely lost the intense religious enthusiasm and evangelical zeal of their grandparents. The strictness produced wealth, and the wealth destroyed the strictness. It was an unbreakable cycle.
And the ultimate proof of this internal decay, that would be the Halfway Covenant, which rolled out between 1657 and 1662. Originally, to even be a church member, you had to stand up and testify to a profound personal conversion experience. But as the younger, wealthier generations lost that fiery zeal, church membership just plummeted. To fix this, the Puritan leadership essentially raised a white flag. They created a theological compromise.
The halfway covenant allowed people to join the church and have their infants baptized simply if they were good moral citizens. You didn't need a conversion experience anymore. This compromise essentially traded their rigorous founding ideals for simple societal inclusion. The city on a hill had compromised itself right into irrelevance. Which really just leaves us with this final thought. We've traced the Puritans' iron grip on power, the defiant rise of Baptists, Quakers, and individual rebels, and the inevitable slip of that strict system through wealth and compromise. So how do the echoes of these 17th century institutions, their focus on local authority, their deep-seated fears of government overreach, and their insistence on absolute liberty actually shape our modern American culture today? It's a pretty powerful reminder that sometimes the absolute tightest control is exactly what creates the strongest push for freedom. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.